They say hell hath no fury like a scorned lover. I found out my wife's friend helped her sneak away with another man. When I confronted him, it got ugly fast. A face-off with a bouncer and a threat he'll never forget. You won't believe how this story goes. I turned to the person who had helped my wife sneak off with her lover. What's wrong with you, Dean? I thought you were our friend. We were just talking about what it meant to be cheated on, and we all agreed. Now, this? Oh, because he's famous, that makes it okay? You think I'll just get over it and forget? I always knew you were a bit dense, but I didn't realize you were this much of an idiot. Do me a favor, don't ever talk to me again. If I'm drowning and you happen to walk by, keep walking. I'd rather die. Now, get the hell away from me. The shock was written all over her face. I had never spoken to anyone in our group like that before. I turned on my heel and started heading for the exit when a massive bouncer stepped in my path. Leaving so soon? He asked. Move aside, I shot back. He smirked, crossing his arms. Drunk and getting aggressive, huh? For everyone's sake, why don't you head back to your table? I'll even get you a drink on the house. I stared at him, not saying a word, until he began to shift uncomfortably. How much is he paying you to get in my way? Must be a decent amount because if you don't step aside right now, you're going to need every cent. His eyes widened, and he started to pout like a kid. You don't stand a chance. I'd mop the floor with your sorry ass without breaking a sweat. You probably would, I admitted, but here's the thing, I don't fight fair, and I don't forgive. I'll come at you the second your back is turned. If you're gonna beat me, you'd better finish the job, 'cause if I'm still breathing, I'll come for you. From that day on, you'll be looking over your shoulder every time you step outside. Maybe I'll even hire a few guys and be halfway around the world when they come for you. Hell, I might even pay extra to make sure they get it right. Kiss your club security career goodbye. If I can't reach you, I'll go after your loved ones. You got a family? Married? You're gonna puke every time. Okay, I'm done. You decide, I finished. He didn't even realize he was backing off. It was kind of amusing. The guy had to be at least 6 feet 5 inches and around 300 pounds, easily outweighing me. I was just 5 feet 11 inches and maybe 180, with a lot less muscle than him. But there was one thing I had that he didn't, pure, unfiltered, nuclear rage. That's something you just can't beat. I was nearly at the door when I felt someone grab my arm. Instinctively, I twisted the hand and yanked the person forward. To my surprise, it was Janie. As soon as I realized, I let go, and she fell on her backside, her skirt riding up and her legs sprawled out. Never would have guessed she went commando. I turned to leave again, but she clung to my leg. Don't do this. Think about your kids, she pleaded. I looked down at her with disdain. You mean like she did when she snuck off with that dirtbag? As far as family goes, I don't have one anymore. I'll always do right by my kids, unlike the woman I used to call my wife. Hell, I might even file for full custody during the divorce. After tonight, it's clear she's not fit to be a mother. Janie let go, covering her mouth with her hand. I actually managed to make it to the elevator before the next round of shouting started. Tom, think about it. You really gonna throw away 10 years over one night? Someone called out. I glanced back at my so-called friend and his crew. I didn't throw anything away. She did. Look me in the eye and tell me you think what she did was okay. Go on, each one of you, look at me and say that if your wife did it, you'd be fine with it. Oh, save it, Mike, I snapped. That train has already left the station. Did you know she's seeing him again? And by the way, Janie came all set for action, didn't realize she was running around without underwear. Is that some sort of signal for, you know, a woman of easy virtue? Mike shot a glare at Erica, who hung her head and shuffled back into the club. The rest of them were yelling, mostly at each other, which gave me the perfect chance to slip into the elevator. It didn't take long for me to pack my things. I left all of Emily's stuff right where it was. If she wanted any of it, she'd have to come back and get it herself. I came across some fancy lingerie, and for a split second, I thought about peeing on it, but in the end, I just tossed it in the trash. It felt like a symbolic gesture. About half an hour later, I made my way to the parking lot, only to hear voices behind me. My so-called friends had followed me. They started arguing, and Eric stepped right in front of my car door. "You've got time, before I kick this into gear, to move out of my way. Anyone who doesn't move now is gonna end up as a stain on the pavement. Move it. Are you even going to listen to us?" he managed to say. That was all he got out before I swung. None of them knew how to fight or defend themselves. I knew this because, as a teen, I had a nasty temper and got into more than a few brawls. It had landed me in hot water with the law several times, and when given the choice between counseling or juvenile detention, I opted for the therapy sessions. It helped me a lot with managing my anger. I still got mad, but I rarely lost control. Right then, though, I didn't give a damn. I stepped over him, opened the door, and slid into the driver's seat. One last look back, and then I put the car in gear, stomping on the gas pedal. The tires screeched, and they scattered like startled birds. I had no clue where I was headed or what I'd do when I got there. She had been gone for nearly an hour by now, so chances were she was already in bed with him. My first impulse was to hunt them down and kill them both, but I knew that was unlikely for a lot of reasons. This guy was the star tight end on the local pro football team, and the whole town was banking on him to bring home a championship this season. He just inked a 3-year deal worth $106 million, on top of the millions he'd already made. His place was probably more secure than Fort Knox. Besides, I wasn't some martial arts expert or an ex-Navy SEAL. I was just an ordinary guy. A guy in decent shape, sure, but still just a guy. No endless wealth, no powerful connections, nothing. As I sat at a red light, an idea hit me. There was something I could do, and this was the perfect time to start. I realized that if I took this path, there'd be no going back. I pulled into a 24-hour diner that advertised free Wi-Fi. Before diving into my plan, I took a moment to think it over. If I wanted to get some revenge and maybe a bit of satisfaction, social media was my best shot. Emily had every possible account: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, even some app called TikTok. I wasn't into any of it. I'm a bit of a tech dinosaur. I could barely navigate the internet myself, but I knew someone who could: my niece. She'd just turned 18 and had 4 scholarship offers, 2 from Ivy League schools and 2 from tech colleges on both coasts. I gave her a call, and she was surprised to hear from me at such a late hour. But when I told her I'd pay her $500 if she'd come and help me out, she got interested real quick. I was about to tell her where I was when I heard a ping. "Found you, Uncle. We'll be there in 7 minutes," she said. I briefly wondered who we referred to, but since she was on her way, I didn't give it much thought. While I waited, I went inside and asked the waitress for a quiet booth, somewhere away from the other customers. Then I made her an offer. "You close at midnight, right?" She nodded. "How many more customers are you expecting before then, and how much do you think they'll tip?" "While you're thinking it over, let me tell you this: I've got 2 friends on the way, and I'd like us to have as much privacy as possible while we work. Tell the owner I'll cover any lost income if he lets us sit here undisturbed for an hour or so. And I'll throw in $200 for you if you keep our drinks and coffee coming." She grinned. "It's late February, and it's freezing out there. Anyone with sense is either out somewhere warm or hunkered down at home. I'll go ahead and close up right now. I can afford to since I'm the owner here. Give me $400, 3 for me and 1 for my cook." Do you need anything else before I send him on his way? Right then, my niece showed up, and she wasn't alone, she had a guy with her. I had to do a double take because she looked surprisingly cute for a self-proclaimed geek. I almost didn't recognize her. She sure cleaned up nice when she ditched the ripped jeans and gaming t-shirts for a dress. It was a bright red club dress that barely covered her very shapely backside. I found myself wondering if my sister even knew her daughter owned clothes like that. She was nothing like the little tomboy I remembered. I quickly apologized, feeling a bit awkward. Look, I'm sorry, guys. If I had known you had other plans, I never would have asked you to come out. I know this might sound crazy, but just hear me out first. Let me explain what happened. When I finished telling my story, both of them stared at me, their mouths hanging open. Nanette was the first to react, stuttering in disbelief. Wait, let me get this straight. Your wife, my aunt, left you alone at a club so she could spend the night with some big-shot athlete? And your so-called friends helped her sneak away? What kind of friends do you even have? Honestly, this is new territory for me, I admitted. Actually, they're her friends. She hung out with them back in high school and college. She was thrilled when my company offered me a promotion to this city. She was waving goodbye to Chicago out the back window when we left. I talked to them for a bit and thought we shared the same values. Safe to say, we're not friends anymore. Okay, here's the deal, I continued. I'm going to tell you what I want to do, and you tell me how terrible of an idea it is and what kind of trouble I'll land in if I go through with it. I laid out my plan, and as soon as I finished, Eric and Nanette exchanged a glance and then burst into laughter. Once they managed to catch their breath, Nanette asked Eric to grab the black box from his car. It turned out to be an unregistered laptop that she had customized a bit. No one will be able to trace this, she explained confidently. I'm going to ping different stations around the world, never staying on one for more than half a second. I've been perfecting this since I was 13, keeping it under wraps until I was old enough to file for patents. That's a big reason why those colleges are after me and why the Army offered me a pretty sweet deal to skip college and work directly for them. Nanette fired off question after question as she set up the laptop. All set, she declared, turning the screen towards me. It was my wife's Facebook page. I'm in. Let the chaos begin. They scrolled through her posts, pausing occasionally to ask who certain people were while Nanette jotted down notes on her phone. When a photo popped up showing her best friend and some of those people involved in shady behavior, I nearly lost it. I took a deep breath, then rattled off the names of my so-called friends who had been with us. Within minutes, Nanette had seized control of all her accounts. She smirked as she glanced at Dean's profile. This one needs a serious shake-up. Ready to make it as revolting as possible? Eric had been quiet up until now. You're sure about this? He asked cautiously. Once we go down this road, there's no turning back. You'll blow up your entire family. I'm positive. I haven't thought about anything else since this mess started. There's no way I could ever live with her again. She dropped a bomb, so I'm considering going nuclear. Let's do this. Nanette began typing, impersonating my wife. Exciting update. I'm thrilled to announce that I've officially joined the celebrity club. The fake post was raunchy but somehow had that bragging tone she'd use. I'm with Mark. I'm so proud he picked me out of all the women in the club. Huge thanks to my bestie for distracting my husband while I snuck away. I'd say I owe her one, but I've done the same for her more than a few times. Remember Atlantic City, D, during the bachelorette party? And from what you said, he's a pro with a puck. Ha. Nanette added a flurry of emojis to her post, then started typing again. Taking a little break right now, catching our breath, so to speak. We'll be gearing up for round 2 soon. Fingers crossed for some overtime. She then crafted fake messages from every woman who had been at the club, passing them around as if they were eagerly waiting for their chance with the superstar. Janie even threw in a jab at her own husband, complaining about his lack of size and how she was desperate for some real action. She added that it wasn't about money, it was all about being properly equipped. Nanette dug up some photos of the jerk and plastered them all over, along with a few shots of Emily in a skimpy bikini, the kind she was too shy to wear at home but flaunted during vacations. "Just giving you a glimpse of what we're bringing to the game," she captioned. By now, it was close to midnight, but her notifications were blowing up as people swarmed to view the posts. I could almost picture phones lighting up all over her social circle despite the late hour. Then Nanette went on a spree, lighting up Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. I wasn't worried about Emily getting calls because I was sure Nanette had already turned off her phone to block any interference. The comments started flooding in. "Is this some kind of prank? I'm sure your husband doesn't find it amusing. What's gotten into you?" It was from her favorite aunt. I idly wondered why she was still awake. Nanette fired back, "Not a joke. I saw my shot and took it. How many people can say they've slept with someone famous? If you doubt me, show up at his place around 10 a.m. tomorrow. 130 Wyndham Circle. The place is a freaking mansion. The rich really do live differently. We'll probably be up by then, and you can catch my walk of shame, though I'm thinking of it more as a walk of glory." Another person jumped into the conversation. I didn't know her, but it didn't matter. She had over 700 friends, and they were all getting this story. Seriously? Are you proud of ditching your husband to sleep with someone else? Do you really think your marriage can survive this? I love my husband, Nanette typed, pretending to be Emily. He's the best thing that ever happened to me, and he loves me. I know he can handle this. Sure, it'll be tough, but I'll pamper him, and in time, he'll forgive me. It's fine. And hey, who says it's just one night? It might not be the last time. Are you serious? Are you drunk? Did he drug you or something? And about never doing it again, the reply continued, did you ever think you'd do it the first time? You're delusional. I'm unfriending you. Don't even try to reach out to me. I hope, when daylight comes, you still think it was worth it. Because this might be all you have left. That last comment came from her boss's wife, and it sparked a new idea in my head. Nanette took it from there, posting everything on the company's social media page. Monday was going to be an interesting day at work. Another comment popped up. This is nonsense, right? If you think this is funny, you're sorely mistaken. Every word of it is true, Nanette replied, still posing as Emily. We'll be just fine. I believe in my husband. And what about his faith in you? The response shot back. The only explanation is that you've been hit by some Martian ray of depravity. It redirects all the blood in your body straight to your crotch, leaving you incapable of rational thought. I've seen some foolish choices in my day, but this takes the cake. It's practically Darwin Award material, except those usually end in death, though maybe the death of your marriage counts. I'm with Rosalind on this, another voice chimed in. Don't even try to reply, because you're getting blocked. This came from her cousin, who lived in another state. I found myself wondering just how long it would take for the entire extended family to get wind of the details. Nanette looked up at me, her expression somber. She always adored Emily. You're tearing her apart, ripping out the foundations of her life. Are you absolutely sure you don't want to stop now? Not just yet, I replied. There are a few more things I need to do before I'm done with her, completely. We bombarded posts to the team's website, the NFL offices, his charities, the mayor's office, the city council, every official site we could think of. Nanette went to work flooding Instagram and Twitter. It was like a nuclear detonation. Posts and comments flooded in as fast as the internet could handle. She then located his accounts and did the same. This guy was seen as a role model for athletes engaging in public life. He ran 2 charities and was always volunteering for one cause or another. The team and the league absolutely idolized him. Time to bring some pain. Eric managed to dig up the contact info of a sports journalist who had a serious grudge against this guy, for reasons unknown to us. The reporter was irritated at being woken up, but his tone changed fast when I told him what we had. Eric used a voice scrambler on his phone to make me sound like a woman. "Stop whining," I snapped. "I'm giving you a scoop. Mark is currently shacked up with a married woman at his house. And he knew she was married because he picked her up from the Shadow Lounge tonight. Apparently, this isn't his first time. Talk to the bouncer if you need confirmation. Her name is Emily Hamilton. She's been married for 10 years and has 2 young kids. So much for a model NFL athlete, huh?" We found out later that the journalist's anger stemmed from Mark pulling the same stunt on him. He and his wife had separated for almost a year before they reconciled, and their relationship was still hanging by a thread. Plus, it was the off-season, with not much happening in local sports, making the story even juicier. To cover our bases, we also sent emails to the local TV stations and newspapers. I wasn't expecting much from that, but considering how well-known and popular Mark was, it was like throwing chum in shark-infested waters. By 6 in the morning, 2 news vans and a solo reporter were camped out at the gates of his swanky neighborhood, along with a swarm of paparazzi. By 8, someone from the team or maybe the central office showed up to knock on his door. He opened it, wearing nothing but a bathrobe, while the cameras zoomed in from every angle the photographers could find. Luck wasn't on his side because Emily was clearly visible behind him, also in a robe. The rapid clicks of the cameras echoed through the morning air. His eyes widened at the sight of the reporters, and the guy who knocked on his door quickly ducked inside. Whoever that person was, they must have given him the whole rundown because seconds later, Emily rushed to check her Facebook page. The house was a brick fortress, but even from behind the gate, you could hear the gut-wrenching screams. It sounded like the cry of a wounded animal. Frantically, she tried to shut down her account, only to find it had been locked. Later, Nanette counted over 3,000 comments spread across various social media platforms in just the first 6 hours. Emily had never been more famous, or infamous. By 10 o'clock, they finally made their exit from the house. Emily had a scarf wrapped around her head, but everyone knew who she was. I could hardly believe the media frenzy, but then again, he was a public figure, and it was the weekend, so there wasn't much else in the news cycle. She climbed into a familiar car, and he drove around the property, slipping out through the service entrance. Clearly, this wasn't their first rodeo. Unfortunately for them, the paparazzi had staked out this exit as well. They even managed to get a crystal-clear shot of Emily as the car passed by. He drove her home, and I wondered what was going through her head when she found herself all alone. Meanwhile, I went and picked up the kids from the nanny's place and took them to their grandparents. I wasn't shocked to see that Emily's parents were already there since our families had always been close. Both our mothers were friends on Facebook, so they had seen every bit of what went down. But Emily wasn't really alone, for other cars had tailed her back to our house, and now they had her address. She bolted out of the car and sprinted to the front door, all while reporters shouted questions at her. Is she his new girlfriend now? Did she leave her husband for him? Does her husband approve of this? That last one was particularly absurd, yet it got asked repeatedly over the following weeks. The conversation with her parents was understandably tense. We know what she did, half the southern states know, her dad started. We also know she wasn't the one posting on Facebook. Frankly, she's not that clever, and she's certainly not suicidal. How could you do this to her? I looked him in the eye. Why don't you ask her that question, and then come back to me? I replied. I had no intention of keeping the kids from seeing their mom, but I wanted a few days for things to settle down. I chose to stay where Emily would least expect me, in the room we'd booked for what was supposed to be our romantic weekend. The clerk at the front desk gave me a strange look as he checked the reservation records but went ahead and gave me a room for 3 days. It was almost amusing to run into some of my old friends as they were checking out, while I headed up to my room to unwind. I'd been running on adrenaline and rage for over 30 hours by then. Dean came charging toward me. "You jerk. Do you even realize how much you've hurt Emily, all for the sake of some pointless fantasy she wanted to live out? She would have been the same woman when she came back home." "No, she was already broken," I answered calmly. "And when something's broken, I have 2 choices. I either decide it's worth fixing, or if I think the cost is too high, I get rid of it. Emily shattered our relationship beyond recognition, and the price to fix it is just too steep." "I never slept with that football player," she screamed from across the hall. "So you're admitting you went on a date with him?" I shot back. "From what I've gathered, you had dinner and then went dancing. Even if you didn't end up in bed with him, wasn't it the chance to live out your fantasy? My husband might be mad if he finds out, but hey, I'll just make him forgive me, right?" The rest of her group stood frozen, but at the mention of the athlete, her husband surged forward. "Just so you know," I said, raising my voice, like I told the bouncer, "I don't fight fair. I fight to win." With that, I threw a punch, then pointed down at him and the security cameras lining the hallway. "It's all on tape, man, your attempt to attack me and my response in self-defense. Consider it a life lesson and focus on what you're going to do next." I turned to my former friends. "I want you all to remember this for the rest of your lives. I'm getting divorced soon, and I'd bet good money that I won't be the only one. You all need to think long and hard about your choices. I'd wish you luck, but honestly, I hope your lives implode just like you helped wreck mine." Despite their cries and demands, I never set foot in my old house again. Emily was furious at first, completely clueless as to why I was reacting the way I did. It wasn't that big of a deal, she'd argue. Sure, she could have abandoned me in the worst possible way and spent the night with a total stranger, but that's all in the past now, so it's time to move on, right? He's famous, for God's sake. It's done and over with, so why can't we just go back to normal? She'd had a crush on that jerk ever since we lived in Chicago and he played for the Bears. I'd watch the games sometimes, and Emily would join me. When that charity poster of him came out, wearing nothing but long knit underwear, she just had to have it. It must have felt like a dream come true when he asked her to dance. When she realized I wasn't going to crawl back home like a good little husband, she grew enraged. And when she was served with divorce papers citing adultery, she was absolutely livid. Emily hurled every threat she could think of at me, but I stood firm. She even fell to her knees, pleading, but I showed no mercy. She barely managed to keep her job. It was touch and go for a while, and it took ages before her boss would say anything more than the bare minimum to her. As for his wife, it was even longer before she would even acknowledge Emily's existence. We were just regular folks, and this whole scandal would have died down if it hadn't been for who she had slept with. The paparazzi had a field day, and once they threw enough cash at the bouncer, he spilled everything. Turns out there were at least 3 other incidents at that club. Mark sure loved to have his fun. I bet he soon regretted leaving Chicago for his new team. The Panthers were based in Carolina, and North Carolina is a state that still has an alienation of affection law on the books. The guy should have bought a house across the state line. My lawyer advised me to hold off on suing him until the divorce was finalized, but his team and the NFL went straight into defense mode. One evening, there was a knock on the door of my new apartment. A man with a suitcase stood there. "Sir, I'd like a word." "Get lost." I slammed the door in his face and locked up tight. He pounded on the door so hard I called the police. They came and politely asked him to leave. Before walking away, he glanced up at the security camera I'd installed and shook his fist, looking furious. Not long after, the new team owner gave me a call. He introduced himself, but I cut him off. How did a total of 4 people in the world get my number? He let out a sigh. Does it really matter? I hung up on him and immediately went to the phone store to get a new number. It took just 8 days before they tracked me down again. Hello, sir, I represent the charity Go Deep. Could I have a moment of your time? Sorry, I already support 3 charities and don't have the funds to contribute to another. Best of luck. Wait. I'm not asking for a donation. Actually, it's the opposite. We'd like to offer you a substantial sum. Why on earth would you want to give me money? Sir, our founder and major donor, Mark Law. I hung up again and blocked the number. They somehow found my new email address and started sending me long-winded letters about how my actions had hurt the charity and caused donations to drop. I couldn't resist responding, so I called them up. So, you're saying it's my fault that your charity is suffering? How does that make any sense? Your allegations against Mark have tarnished his reputation, causing him undue hardship. If you would publicly announce that you've forgiven him and your wife for their temporary lapse in judgment, and allow him to make amends, the public interest would eventually fade. Let's be crystal clear here. This man seduced my wife right in front of me and around 50 other witnesses. The bouncer, who he bribed, tried to block me when I went after them. She stayed the entire night, and while she won't admit they had sex, we all know that's exactly what happened. How about this? Let him publicly confess that he slept with my wife, knowing full well that she was married, and then I'll consider it. That's not in anyone's best interest. Is there really no way we can persuade you to let this go? This old dog doesn't just sleep. He snarls and foams at the mouth, ready to bite someone's rear end. I'll tell you what, let him donate every cent he has to some scientist to invent a time machine, go back, and not sleep with my wife, and then we'll talk. Until then, if he thinks things are bad now, don't call me again. I later vented to Eric and Nanette about not being able to hang up the phone fast enough. That gave them an idea, and they ended up creating an app that did just that. It played the sound of an old-fashioned telephone slamming down, perfect for when you wanted to hang up on someone in style. I'm sure quite a few telemarketers got a nasty surprise in the months that followed. They even patented it and included me in the documentation, saying that although it was their technical concept, it was inspired by my frustration. 33 cents might not sound like much, until you multiply it by 50,000 downloads in just the first 2 months. Then it turned into some serious cash. I used that money to buy a proper house instead of the apartment I had been staying in, and the kids were thrilled about it. It tore me up to part ways with them, but every time I glanced at Emily, all I wanted was to strangle her right then and there. The poor woman was truly delusional. I mean seriously delusional. She honestly believed I would just shrug off what she did and continue with my life as if nothing happened. Her favorite excuse was, it was just one night. Yes, one night. And one night is already too many. Be honest for once, you knew I would never let this happen if I knew beforehand. So, you used your so-called friends to distract me while you sneaked off with your lover like a thief. Because that's exactly what you are, Emily, a thief. You stole our future that night, and you have no one to blame but yourself and that famous lover of yours. Hell, he's probably laughing about it right now. He doesn't care if he shattered our family, as long as he got the free fling you so willingly offered. She was stunned. I rarely raise my voice in anger, especially around the kids, and I don't think I ever directed that kind of fury toward her before. Maybe that was the issue, she assumed I was weak and would be too scared to let her go, especially because of the kids. She probably thought she could use them to keep me in line. The children didn't take things well. In time, I got them into therapy, and it slowly began to help. The therapist made sure not to criticize their mother directly. She explained to them that their mom had made a very serious mistake and was now facing the consequences. We were invited to a few individual sessions, and since I was footing the bill, I got a summary of how things were going. Your wife is still in denial, the therapist reported. She tells the children that although she made a mistake, it isn't serious enough to justify a divorce. Your daughter asked her outright what she did, and she dodged the question, saying it was an adult matter she would understand when she was older. As for your son, he's only 4, but he's absorbing what he sees and hears from the media. She never directly answers his questions, either. She just says that she made a terrible mistake, but I don't think he's buying it. He seems to have a lot of resentment toward her. I was asked similar questions during my own session, and I answered as truthfully as I could. Yes, son, I'm divorcing your mom because of what you heard. She broke a promise and a commitment when she did this. You know how important it is to keep your promises, right? Well, for adults, it's even more serious. Your mom made those promises in front of 200 people, both legally and spiritually, they were binding, and she was well aware of the consequences if she broke them. But she did it anyway. I still love your mother, but I can't trust her anymore, and trust is what matters most here. Imagine if I promised to pick you up from school every Wednesday and did that for a whole year, but then, one day, I just didn't show up. You'd feel hurt, wouldn't you? Now, what if I made that choice knowing I was supposed to pick you up but decided to do something else instead? How many times would you wait for me before realizing you couldn't trust me anymore? Would you believe me if I said it would never happen again? I think I managed to get through to them a bit and followed the therapist's guidelines to the letter. I avoided saying anything negative about their mother. I told them that while our relationship had changed, we both loved them very much. Other than that, I didn't mention their mom unless they brought it up. Emily, on the other hand, did the complete opposite. She told the kids that, yes, she had made a serious mistake, but not one big enough to justify a divorce. She claimed I was just being stubborn and that everything would eventually work out. When the therapist found out, she was livid and scheduled a one-on-one session with Emily. How could you do this to your children? The therapist asked. Your husband has shown no intention of reconciling. In fact, during one of our sessions, he discussed the reality of divorce with them. They have enough classmates who've been through similar situations to grasp the basics. They've also seen enough parents remarry to understand that someone new might come into their lives eventually. Your children believe, rightfully so, that your relationship with their father is over. I know you've talked to him multiple times, but it hasn't worked, and I think I know why. You still refuse to admit that what you did was wrong, at least, wrong enough to lead to a divorce. I strongly suggest marriage counseling. I don't think it will help you reconcile, but it might bring you to a place where you can accept the situation and move forward. This didn't seem to shake Emily's world at all, except for the mention of counseling. Her lawyer was sharp, and the judge ordered 8 sessions. The therapist would have the authority to end them after 4 sessions if there was no sign of progress, or extend them if things started to improve. My lawyer tried to talk me out of it, but I stood up and asked the judge if I could speak. He nodded, warning me to keep things respectful. Your Honor, I need to make this crystal clear, I have zero interest in any relationship with my wife beyond co-parenting our kids. That being said, I will attend these sessions, but I flat out refuse to do more than 8. That should be more than enough to resolve any lingering issues. And I'm serious about this, Your Honor. Yes, you can jail me, fine me, or both if I refuse, but let's be real, this case is getting a lot of media attention, and I'm sure you don't want it to become a circus of personal attacks. I'm perfectly willing to talk to the press. One last thing, Your Honor, I want her lover to sit in on one of these sessions and explain why he thinks it's okay to sleep with married women and why he believes it shouldn't impact my marriage. Thank you. My lawyer looked at me like I had lost my mind, and the judge seemed caught between laughing and reprimanding me. Emily looked like she might throw up, and her attorney was scrambling for a rebuttal. Finally, the judge struck his gavel twice. I do not have the authority to send him to marriage counseling unless it's his own marriage. I will write a formal request for his attendance, but don't get your hopes up. Your lawyer may inform you that it's perfectly legal to request his presence here in court, but that decision is ultimately up to him. Lawyers either provide a list of therapists or get one from the court, but I want all parties to agree on it. The sessions will begin in 2 weeks. Also, I'm setting the pace at 2 sessions per week so we can wrap this up as soon as possible. If either of your clients misses a session, I won't threaten them with jail time. I will simply count the session as valid, and it won't be rescheduled. Bailiff, let's move on to the next case. Emily was fuming. She was already waiting for me in my car with a determined look on her face. This needs to end, she demanded. This isn't how I envision things going. I hesitated for a second. Talking to her without our lawyers present seemed like a terrible idea, but curiosity got the better of me. Just for the sake of conversation, what exactly did you think would happen? I asked. I thought you'd be mad, but that you'd love me enough to get past it. It was just one night. All those years we spent together, our family, our children, you're really going to throw it all away over one night? It wasn't just one night, I replied, my voice cold and firm. It was every single night for the rest of our lives after that. What you did was deliberate, calculated, and utterly disrespectful. You made me look like a fool in front of our so-called friends, some of whom even helped you sneak away. I would have bet my life on your love for me and our kids, until that night, Emily. We're done, and no amount of counseling is going to change that. Wait, I need a favor. What kind of favor could you possibly ask of me? I shot back. It's about Mark, she said, her voice wavering. Can you ease up on him a little? It's starting to hurt his charities. Think of the kids. You mean like you and he thought about ours that night? I replied coldly. I couldn't care less about his charities, and trust me, soon enough, they'll be the least of his problems. Now, tell me, how did you know? She hung her head, guilt washing over her face. He called me. Oh, really? And how exactly did he get your number? Her cheeks flushed an even deeper red, and that's when it hit me. You gave it to him that night, didn't you? Why? In case he wanted a repeat performance. It's not like that, she protested. I don't know why I gave it to him. I just did. I should have known you wouldn't help. I laughed, shaking my head as I got into the car. I couldn't help but wonder how she could have become so naive. Maybe he really did have some sort of superpower that scrambled her common sense. Throughout this ordeal, I was constantly pressured to be reasonable. The league, the team, football-related organizations, his charities, even a few sports talk shows, they all tried to get me to let it go. My boss, a die-hard fan of the team, also pushed me to back off. My response? I found a new job. I think he realized a bit too late how I might react and how it would look to our organization and the public. He tried to backpedal and keep me on board, but by then, the damage was done. I imagine he wasn't too thrilled with the formal complaint I filed with corporate HR. I think it put his future with the company in serious jeopardy, and rightly so. Things escalated to the point where I started recording every conversation I had. At first, I kept quiet about it, but soon I began mentioning that I was recording, and that led to some pretty brief discussions. The sports reporter we contacted that night invited me onto his radio show. It was his most popular segment, and I dropped some bombshells, snippets of conversations I'd had with various people. The one with the team owner was especially well received. The owner called me, fuming and threatening to sue. The host of the show could barely contain his laughter. You can't see him, but my guest here is nodding his head. Care to respond? I nodded, and when the microphone came on, I started with a chuckle. And what exactly are you planning to sue me for? Telling the truth. I checked, and in this state, it's perfectly legal to record a conversation without the other party's knowledge. It's called one-party consent. Besides, I have no intention of using that recording for legal action, unless you really insist. My lawyer says we've got a solid case against you, the team, and the entire league for harassment and emotional distress. Still want to go down that road? The line went dead. The owner hung up. The show ended up getting picked up by several syndicated programs and even made national news for a brief time. I never heard from them again. As for Mr. Mark, he found that the press steered clear of him unless they were asking about the divorce. He was used to being seen as a hero, the center of attention, and the sudden lack of the spotlight really ate at him. Even though his lawyers advised him to keep quiet and stay cautious, he eventually cracked and did something incredibly stupid. He showed up at my house. After I moved, one of the first things I did was install a high-end security system. Ironically, it was the same company he had once advertised for, and it turned out to be worth every penny. One evening, I heard a knock on the door. I checked my phone, which was linked to the security cameras, and saw 3 massive guys standing on my porch. None of them looked pleased. With my kids in the house, I didn't hesitate. I pressed the silent panic button, which automatically alerted the police. They called almost immediately. You'd be surprised how many people accidentally set off their alarms. Sir, this is 911. Did you trigger the alarm? Yes, there are 3 very large men standing on my porch, guys I don't know. They don't look too friendly. I haven't opened the door, but now they're knocking and demanding I let them in. Sir, we have a patrol car just 4 minutes away. If you're worried about your safety, do not answer the door. I thanked the operator and waited. 3.5 minutes later, I cracked open the door, keeping the deadbolt firmly locked. How can I help you? I asked. Mark sent us to negotiate. You're going to stop all legal action against him right now. And if I refuse? I replied calmly. Then we'll give you a lesson in how to cooperate. Gentlemen, you're on private property. I'm asking you to leave immediately. The biggest one sighed in irritation. Looks like this guy needs some convincing, he muttered. With that, he yanked the storm door clean off its hinges like it was made of cardboard. They were about to step inside when a voice behind them barked, "Police. Stop right there and turn around with your hands up. If looks could kill, I'd be 6 feet under." The largest one looked like he was ready to make a move, but his buddies talked him out of it. Before long, they were all lying face down on the ground with cuffs around their wrists. The sergeant took my statement and, after reviewing the security footage, charged them with felony trespassing on private property. I later found out that felony trespassing carries much harsher penalties than regular trespassing. The key difference is that normal trespassing is usually a spur-of-the-moment decision, often without real criminal intent. But showing up on someone's property specifically to cause harm puts it in a whole different league. Turns out one of the guys was a gardener at the stadium, another was just a friend of the third, and the third was a player on the practice squad. That guy got fired on the spot. Apparently, Mark had promised him a spot on the main roster if he did this favor, even though he had no authority to make such a promise. The other 2 had been paid $1,000 each. In the end, this little stunt cost Mark a lot more since he had to cover their legal fees. I'm not sure how much he ended up paying, but they all pled guilty and got slapped with hefty fines, which Mark had to foot the bill for. He, too, had to face trial for orchestrating the whole thing, and not even his status as a local hero could save him. His lawyers managed to downgrade the charge to a misdemeanor, but he was still hit with a $5,000 fine and sentenced to 200 hours of community service. TMZ caught footage of him in an orange vest, picking up trash along the highway. The clip went up on YouTube and racked up 600,000 views in the first week. Emily turned out to be the most expensive fling Mark had ever pursued. Some of his fans turned against him, and while it wasn't shown on TV, there were signs in the stadium at the start of the new season. This started affecting his performance on the field. One group even had a massive banner that read, "Put someone's wife on the goal line, it motivates him." Security made them take it down, but the damage was already done. The image went viral within 3 hours and hit 750,000 views in just 2 days. Mark's career took a nosedive. He went from being a star player to barely getting any playing time. One of his sponsors cancelled a major promotion they were planning for him, saying they needed to wait until things settled down, which everyone knew meant never. But then the odds finally caught up with me one night. They came out of nowhere, 4 of them. They beat me badly. These guys knew exactly what they were doing because it all happened in under 90 seconds. I can't imagine how much worse it could have been if a colleague hadn't walked out of the office right after me. When he yelled, they showed their professionalism by scattering immediately. 10 minutes later, I was in an ambulance, and within an hour, I found myself in a hospital room. They kept me overnight for observation due to a concussion. My head throbbed with pain, and I drifted in and out of consciousness. At one point, I woke up and thought I saw Emily sitting by my bedside, but I quickly fell back asleep. The next time I woke up, I was alone. It took a full week before I was well enough to return to work. The police had managed to obtain some surveillance footage from various businesses across the street, but there was nothing they could identify. The officer who took my statement gave me a bit of advice. "If you've ticked someone off recently, you need to tell me," he said. These guys were pros. They avoided the cameras as much as they could, wore oversized hats and baggy clothes, so we couldn't make out any faces or identifying marks like tattoos or scars. I laid out the whole story for him. They questioned Mark, who laughed it off, admitting he didn't like me but swearing he had nothing to do with the attack. The police didn't believe him for a second, but without concrete evidence, their hands were tied. I had to cancel my weekends with the kids for a while. I wasn't physically up to it, and I didn't want them to see me until the bruises faded. Emily was horrified when she found out what happened and agreed to take care of them. She even offered to help me out, but I politely declined. The counseling sessions dragged on as expected, turning into a repetitive cycle that carried through 4 sessions. By the 5th session, even the therapist had grown weary. She asked us both to stay quiet while she spoke. "We're at a standstill," she began, "and quite frankly, I don't think we're going to move past it. Emily, you refuse to accept that what you did was wrong by any reasonable standard, and you can't seem to grasp why it's destroying your marriage. Let's break this down. You left your husband standing alone in the middle of a club, where you'd both gone as a prelude to a romantic weekend. You bought new lingerie, you two were intimate before and during the night out, and then, out of nowhere, you left to spend the night with another man. You did all this without warning, using your friends to keep him from following. Now, imagine if he did this to you, left you standing in a public place surrounded by your friends, who were in on the whole scheme. Would you be understanding? Based on your behavior and words here, I highly doubt it. Now, let me turn to your husband." She looked at me, sadness filling her eyes. "You'll never get back to the way things were, that much is clear," she continued. "I can see it in every interaction. And I understand that, truly. But I have to ask, before she walked out of that club with another man, you loved her deeply. For years, she was faithful and reliable. Your wife insists it was a one-time mistake, something even she can't fully explain, but it was significant enough to risk your entire marriage. She promises it's over and that it'll never happen again. Is there any part of you that's willing to try again? I'll give your wife a chance to speak first, but please, let her finish before responding. Do you agree?" I nodded, and the therapist turned to Emily, who took a deep breath before starting. "You've said many times that I lack remorse for what I did," she began. "But I do have remorse. A lot of it. I never imagined this would damage our marriage so deeply that it would lead to divorce. I knew it would hurt you, make you angry, but honestly, I never thought you'd react the way you did. I am deeply sorry for the pain I've caused, and I can promise you with all my heart that I will never do anything like this again, especially now that I understand the cost. I'm begging you, even if you can't fully forgive me, Please come home and give me the chance to make things right. She seemed pleased with her speech, looking at me with hope in her eyes. I took a deep breath. You can say whatever you like, Emily, but deep down, you knew exactly how much this would hurt us. You knew I wasn't the kind of guy who'd just roll over and say, "Oh, it's only this once," and she promises not to do it again. That's nonsense. If I did that, you'd lose every ounce of respect for me, and even if you didn't go looking for it, the next time an opportunity came around, you'd be off like a shot, knowing I'd just forgive you again. Well, I'm not forgiving this time, and I refuse to put myself in a position where I'd have to forgive something like this ever again. Beyond the blatant disrespect, it's the destruction of trust that has sealed the deal for me. If you were gone for more than half an hour, I'd already be wondering if you were with him or someone else. Let me be perfectly clear, we are not staying married. You can drag this out, pull every delay tactic in the book, but eventually, the court will get fed up, and the divorce will go through. Don't make this any longer than it has to be. I turned to the therapist. Are we finished here? She let out a sigh. Yes. I'll file my report with the court by Wednesday, stating that this marriage is irreparably broken and recommending that the divorce be granted. No. I'm not giving up. Emily cried. Please, honey, think about the children. I think about the kids every damn day when they're not with me, I replied coldly. Tell me, Emily, if the kids meant so much to you, how many times did you think about them while you were in his mansion? Was it worth it? Are they proud of you? Probably not. And neither is the rest of your family, who still live in the real world. Face it, Emily, you destroyed everything, and you did it on purpose. See you in court. I think, by the end, the reality of her actions finally started to hit home. Everyone was completely worn out. Her lawyer, my lawyer, the judge, everyone looked like they had aged years through the process. Even one of the bailiffs seemed to have gained a few wrinkles. After the therapist submitted her report, the judge blocked yet another attempt to delay proceedings and declared the divorce final. Emily left the courtroom without saying a word. When I turned to my lawyer and asked, "Now," he smirked. He gave a smile that was as fierce as a mountain lion's. Yes. Now. The very next day, Mr. Mark got hit with the alienation of affection lawsuit. He shouldn't have signed with the Panthers or bought that house in North Carolina. I heard his reaction was priceless. He can't do this, he fumed to his lawyer. His lawyer sighed. I'm afraid he can. North Carolina still enforces this law. Yes, it's outdated and most states have repealed it, but this isn't one of them. My advice is to settle as quickly as possible to avoid more bad publicity. A dragged-out case could cost you far more than any settlement. Everyone in Mark's circle started calling in, his legal team, the heads of his charities, the team owner, even the NFL commissioner. They all begged me to settle the case out of court. The offers kept increasing, and even my lawyer suggested I take one, but I refused. For me, this was never about the money, it was about dragging him through the mud. My lawyer's investigators managed to get the bouncer and the club staff to admit they were paid to help Mark secure targets. Mark tried his best to avoid appearing in court, but he had to testify several times, so he had no choice. Once, he tried to get out of a Friday night appearance by claiming he needed to fly to another city to prepare for a rare Saturday game. The judge wasn't having any of it. Take a later flight and be here tomorrow, the judge ordered sternly. I suspect he scheduled the session as late as possible just to irritate Mark. Mark had his charm, and his lawyers tried to pack the jury with women, but my lawyer was savvy enough to outmaneuver them at every turn. In the end, they ended up with 7 women on the jury, 3 were over 50 and happily married, 1 was gay, 2 were young and single, and the last was a recently divorced blonde. Of the men, 2 were young and single, while the remaining 3 were middle-aged and married. Initially, Mark claimed he had never even seen Emily before. However, the surveillance footage showing her walking to his car and later doing the walk of shame back to his house forced him to admit that she had been there. He then pivoted to saying they hadn't slept together, insisting he was simply protecting her from her abusive husband. Emily thought that if she detailed her experience in a letter to me, I would understand her perspective better. Since the letter was addressed to me and in my possession, we were able to introduce it as evidence in court. No one bought his story about the cruel husband. The final nail in the coffin came when Emily took the stand. She spilled everything, including the exact number of times they had been together. I didn't know the precise number before. Her letter had suggested it was 3 or 4, but in reality, it was 5. The jury took less than an hour to deliberate before returning with their verdict. Part of the trial required a full financial disclosure, and I think everyone in the room was stunned to learn just how wealthy he was. Mark had been in the NFL for 7 years and had amassed a net worth of $96 million. My lawyer nearly fainted when the jury awarded me close to a third of that, $30 million. It was the largest award in state history but still consistent with what other spouses had received in similar cases. The previous record had been $8.8 million. The law had changed recently but still allowed for up to a third of a defendant's assets to be awarded in cases like this. When the law was first enacted, hardly anyone imagined that such massive sums would be involved. There had been an attempt in the state legislature to repeal the law, but it never made it past committee. Lucky for me. His lawyers made a lot of noise about filing an appeal while secretly advising him to accept the judgment and move on. They did file a notice of intent to appeal but dropped it a month later and accepted the court's ruling. They knew there was a loophole. If the defendant's wealth increased during the appeal process and they still lost, the award would be adjusted accordingly. In a few months, Mark was set to receive a massive payout from his contract, which would only have increased the amount he owed me. The day after I won the award, my lawyer filed for more lawsuits on behalf of other couples and divorced men and women who had come forward. Out of those 4 cases, 2 ended in divorce, 1 was still on shaky ground, and the last involved a couple who regularly swapped partners and found it amusing that Mark had chosen her. When they saw the potential financial gain, they quickly jumped on board. The divorced wives, including Emily, filed separate lawsuits. I already had my sizable share, but some of the incidents had happened years ago, so they settled out of court for $4 million each. Mark still had several tens of millions left even after those payouts. But the saga didn't end there. It turned out he had also been involved with the wife of one of his teammates and had spent the night with another woman. This was uncovered by my lawyer's investigators, and I was more than happy to make that information public. During the next game, several players seemed to accidentally fall or block in the wrong direction, leading to Mark getting hit hard 3 times. The last hit landed him in concussion protocol. There was enough plausible deniability to avoid direct accusations, but everyone knew that his time with the Panthers was effectively over. He got traded to Green Bay, where he played decently but didn't stand out. His income took a serious hit when the Panthers refused to pay out his contract, citing a morals clause. He ended up settling for just 20% of what he was supposed to receive. His stint with Green Bay was a 1-year deal, and when it expired, they declined to pay the amount he was asking for. That left him signing with Denver for another 1-year contract worth $4 million. He put in his best effort, but when that contract was up, several teams showed interest in him, though they offered significantly reduced salaries. Eventually, he signed with Cincinnati for a 2-year deal at $2.5 million. The contract was strict, loaded with morals clauses that allowed for confiscation of his earnings if he was ever caught in a compromising situation. Although he played consistently, it was far from his peak performance, and they chose not to offer him a new contract when this one ended. By that time, he was 34, worn out, and plagued by recurring injuries. After 2 years in radio with the Bengals, he retired. After that, no one else wanted to hire him. The guy still walked away with a net worth of around $50 million, about a third of what he could have had if not for the lawsuits and bad publicity. Last I heard, he bought 2 car dealerships out in California and was back to his old tricks. One husband took matters into his own hands, and now Mark has a noticeable limp. I doubt he learned anything from it all. I saw his picture in a sports magazine's "Where Are They Now?" section. There he was, posing at the grand opening of his 3rd auto dealership. He'd put on a decent-sized belly and had shaved his head to hide his baldness. Despite everything, his money and past fame probably still drew in plenty of women. For a fleeting moment, I considered mailing the article to Emily. Emily went through a tough stretch. The fallout from her public betrayal and the alienation of affection lawsuit followed her like a dark cloud for weeks. She ended up quitting her old job, saying the shame was too heavy to bear every day. However, thanks to her share of Mark's settlement, she was in a fairly secure financial position. She took nearly a year off before joining a small startup. She did her homework and invested $1 million in the startup, securing a 10% stake in the company. A year later, as the business began to grow, she was promoted. Out of sheer curiosity, I did a bit of research and found that while the company had a solid product and business plan, they were underfunded. After discussing it with my investment managers, I quietly put $5 million into the company under our children's names, giving Emily voting rights by proxy. Despite what she did to me, I knew she would always have the kids' best interests at heart. That investment made her the controlling partner. When the company reached a point where roles needed to be divided, she was promoted to vice president of sales and production. Emily threw herself into the work, often clocking in 50 hours or more each week, but she seemed to thrive on it. Plus, the kids would often come to my house to spend time with their younger brother. Scarlett, my wife, was 6 years younger than me. One of the conditions of our marriage was that we'd have at least one child, and we did, Daniel Brock, named after his grandfather. He was almost 2 now, and I was grateful that the older kids adored him. It gave Scarlett a bit of a breather. One of the first things she did, at my urging, was change her career path. She became a full-time homemaker, which turned out to be a round-the-clock job with 3 teenagers and a toddler to look after. I'm still a light sleeper, and there are nights I wake up and find myself wondering where I'd be now if Emily hadn't cheated.